This is the lecture for Learning Module 5. In this final learning module, we deal with play and ministry, leadership, work and play, worship, and the church as community of play and humor. But first, I'll begin with a kind of a side note. We were discussing among our case studies and in other posts about violence in sports. And I've just read a chapter on Christianity and ice hockey in Canada and the role of violence by Nick DeLuca in the book entitled God, Games, and Globalization. And I'm currently reading the novel Beartown by Frederick Bachman, also about hockey, but set in the U.S. DeLuca talks about how ice hockey shapes Canadian identity, which I'm sure is no news to most of you, and how communities can live and breathe and die by ice hockey, which is depicted in the Beartown story. But DeLuca claims that Christianity and hockey can coexist because the violence in hockey, as well as the justification of that violence, are not unlike the violence and interpretations seen in the Bible. Christian theology and hockey are compatible, he suggests, because violence in Christianity has been justified at times. Think Augustine's just war theory, for example. While certain streams of Christianity are pacifist, like the peace churches, for the most part, our history has shown that Christians condoned or accepted violence in certain cases. In hockey, he says, there is an unwritten code, but well-known and well-established code, which suggests that fights break out. One must follow this code of fair fighting. The fight must be virtuous, so to speak, in the sense of being good for the community involved. It must be reasonably safe. And while there's definitely some fighting that is not virtuous that we've seen, sometimes he claims it is beneficial to the game. And, I was thinking, that makes me think of the church in a way, on a more metaphorical level, of course, in terms of fair fighting that we do. But more on that later. Religions are marked by violence and other human distortions, and this does not stop some people from participating in the church or other religious organizations, nor from passionately defending their faith or tradition. And neither does violence in sports seem to bother many people if it follows a certain code, because people cling to and need heroes and something to get behind. It is kind of the psychology of fandom. But without condoning violence, which is something I stand firmly against in my work, and we've learned about the tragic effects on the brain we see in professional sports. But perhaps a little bit of a caution is in order about a possible hypocrisy and other elitism in thinking that Christians have it all right and sports is irredeemable because of violence. And it would not be correct to suggest that Christian theology does not or has not condoned violence. And one cannot get away with saying, well, that's just bad theology, because it was so pervasive. It was most theology, so that some would say inherent in the actual notion of apologetics or defending the faith. But we know theology reflects the values of the culture, and we approach that critically, and it's always evolving. But I think as we seek to live faithfully and to bring the goodness and love of God to bear on the world, it seems incumbent on us to eschew violence in sports and in other arenas as well. But now turning back to our task, in a world where we are driven by workaholism, which we've been reading about, and attachment to technology and devices that get that work done, we can lose sight of play. The forced dichotomy between work and play is never more apparent. And forced as it is, the gap is widening. But as Brian Sutton Smith suggests, our work can be our play. Those same technological devices can be a game for fun. Golf is not always a game, and research is not always work. I've often called upon the philosopher Albert Borgmann's work on focal things and practices. The Latin word for focus means hearth, as in fireplace. In ancient times, the hearth was the counter to our central heating device on-off switch, if you will. It was the center of a family's life. By focal things and practices, Borgmann refers to things we focus on that center us or ground us, like communal meals, gardening, listening to music, or even running. These things that block out distractions are kin to playing, things that take us away from distractions. Borgmann claimed that was or is the role of religion to provide focal things and practices, holy temples and rituals, and the loss of those focal things is a detriment to society. Courtney Goto talks about revelatory experiencing and playing aesthetically, which bears some similarities here, I think. What are the conditions that foster congregations playing together, we ask? This speaks to our worship life together. As Brian Edgar says, worship is the work of the people, but it is also play. Worship is pointless like play, and worship has no ulterior motive or purpose, but is an end in itself. Now, I've talked about the comparison with baseball. They've been playing baseball for 100 years, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. That's not the point. But the point is to play. Worship is a type of play in that way, something to lose ourselves in. Baseball has certain moves and objects like a ball and a bat, a special language. In the same way, worship has gestures, ways of moving, objects, holy things, and its own special languages of prayer and the like. But in worship, we are bringing people into contact with the sacred. We are bringing people into the corporate memory of the faith, into the communion of saints, into meaning making and what ultimately matters. And we will carry on this discussion further on Brightspace. The church or congregation as community of play is an important notion for us. As leaders, we can come to the view of ourselves and our role within the community of God's people, our localized community of God. Such play is, as Courtney Goto says, localized in the fact that it comes out of the context of a particular community's experience. And parenthetically, no need trying to impose others' experiences onto that. But it is also significant on a teleological level, beyond the present space and time, impacting and leading the future. But you might say, mine is a community of fighting and play gone bad, very bad, and congregations are sometimes like that. But playful leadership is prophetic and courageous, even in the midst of unfair play. even in the midst of conflict and the midst of pain. And it is a sign of good leadership to be able to move with that, not fix it, not a technical Band-Aid solution. They rarely work for long. But the sign of a good leader is that strength of character that allows one to love and help, to listen well, and to speak wisely in the midst of that. Playful prophetic leadership is showing the way to God, making space, opening up space to play, a bounded space, and discerning the playground rules. In such way, pastoral leaders are coaches of our recreation. And you'll read more about playful pastoral leadership in Michael Koppel's text. Coaching fair play and calling people out when they are not doing that is certainly part of it. Roberta Gilbert is an expert on congregational systems theory and leadership. And she's suggested that often people in congregations who seem to love drama, who thrive on conflict, do so because they do not have enough play in their lives or an opportunity to vent or act that out. So they create it in some unhealthy ways and become the bullies of a congregation. They play by wallowing in the mud, so to speak. But also for leaders, our self-awareness of our own baggage, our stuff we carry, our own barriers to authentic relationships and leadership is important. Our own Sabbath practices of play are crucially important here. It is to be engaged in embodied relational knowing within our churches as communities of play. We learn how to practice our faith. We pray, we sing, we baptize, we eat together. We engage in these practices both because we have faith and to enhance our faith. A practice is, and I quote, a coherent and complex form of socially established cooperative human activity, according to Alistair McIntyre. How does one learn a practice? Well, like one learns baseball, one learns by playing, by doing, sometimes by being coached, sometimes by watching, but ultimately by playing, by getting in the game. And the spiritual life itself, I claim, is a pilgrimage of play, a journey toward the divine who loves and enjoys and frolics with us. While we have spent a lot of time in this course learning about play, I would like to invite you into play itself, in the way that Gadamer suggested, that the game plays us, that it is intrinsically motivated for fun, not something you have to do, but something you want to do, for that peak experience that takes us out of ourselves and our seriousness, to be recreated. Ironically, we talk a lot in seminary about self-care. And then we say, okay, now go write a 10-page paper on that. Or go do this, or go do that, follow that discipline. But play is not like that so much. One cannot demand or even assign play. But I do hope that you play, and that you will play, and experience the grace of playing, and are played into new life. I'm going to close with a word about humor and laughter. At the other end of the spectrum from grief and pastoral ministry, because it seems a good thing to end with. Whereas we talk about humor in the church in terms of the Risus Paschalis, the Easter laugh, or dedicate a Sunday to it, Holy Humor Sunday, We can think further about the theological purposes of humor and laughter. They free us. They free us. When we laugh, some people say our burdens fall away. When our hearts leap within us, we find it easier somehow to cope with other people and circumstances. In laughing, we are unconscious of ourselves, our worries, our hang-ups, or we suspend those momentarily. It frees us to see the world as it is, created for God's and our enjoyment. To see that joy. That joy is the meaning of life. For C.S. Lewis, the word joy was his word for the divine presence. Now, of course, humor can be abused and it can trivialize our situations. Yet a sense of humor is an essential protection. Some call it a coping mechanism. And like any coping mechanism, there can be healthy and unhealthy uses of it. But to quote G.K. Chesterton, life is serious, but living cannot be. I return to Jürgen Moltmann, who in his book Theology and Joy asked the question, how can we laugh in a strange land? As in the psalm, how can we sing the songs of Israel in a foreign land? He asked, how can we laugh in this world? Though we might have a burning desire for happiness and enjoyment, our world might not give us often very much cause for rejoicing, it seems. To be happy, to enjoy ourselves, we need to be free. But such freedom has grown scarce. If laughter and enjoyment free us from our burdens, then how can we laugh when our burdens are so overwhelming and so heavy that nothing can seem to lift them? How can we laugh when innocent people are dying? How can we laugh when children are starving? How can we laugh when some teenagers take a gun and randomly shoot other teenagers in a high school? How can we laugh when an earthquake destroys a city? How can we laugh when humans are tortured, families separated? How can we laugh in a strange land? Doesn't it seem that to laugh and enjoy life, that the festivities of our affluent culture are at worst unnatural and at best distasteful, as long as there are such hells on earth? Well, Moltmann recalled the play Fiddler on the Roof. The story, it is about Tevi, a dairy farmer, and his Jewish congregation in the Ukraine. Their sons are forced to serve in a strange army and fight an unwanted war. They are in fear of the next pogrom to be carried out by the Tsar. They're being taxed to death. Still, this small congregation of the persecuted celebrates and dances and sings and laughs in a strange land. Do they do it just to forget their ugly predicament? Maybe there can be no such thing as freedom in the midst of slavery, joy in the midst of suffering, and laughter in the midst of sadness. But laughing is a symbol of anticipated freedom. And laughing itself helps to rid the bonds which alienate us from authentic life. As Moltmann claimed, it is liberatory for real living. Laughter and play are eschatological in this sense, signs of the kingdom in the here and now. As Psalm 126 reads, "When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for us, and we are glad. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. I am so thankful for having each of you in this course, and thank you for your participation and valuable contributions to our learning. Play in grace. Amen.